Wife started acting suspicious after her new job, then I found out she was sleeping with her HS sweetheart, so I exposed her at our anniversary party in front of the entire family. I've been married to my wife, Jennifer, for the past 5 years. We met each other for the first time when we were both working at the same company. What started as a professional acquaintance quickly blossomed into a deep connection, and after 2 years of dating, we decided to tie the knot. Jennifer is, without a doubt, absolutely drop-dead gorgeous. I know that might sound like an exaggeration, but it's the truth. My wife has this natural beauty that turns heads wherever she goes, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard people, both friends and strangers, mention just how stunning she is. It's something that other men have often pointed out to me, almost as if they're in awe that I'm the lucky guy who gets to call her my wife. But, to be honest, it's never really bothered me. If anything, I take pride in it. For me, it's not just about her physical appearance. Jennifer is beautiful inside and out. She has this incredible energy, a confidence that radiates from within. She's also incredibly smart, driven, and kind. She's the whole package, and I'm grateful every day that we found each other. And one of the things I love most about her is that she's just as passionate about fitness as I am. Going to the gym and maintaining my own fitness has always been important to me, so it's amazing to have a partner who values the same things. We both share a love for staying active and taking care of our bodies, and that's something that has strengthened our bond over the years. Whether we're hitting the gym for a workout, going for a run, or trying out new fitness challenges, it's something that keeps us connected and motivated. It's a part of our relationship that I really cherish. So, while people might see Jennifer's beauty first, I'm lucky enough to know the amazing woman behind it. She has been my partner, my best friend, and someone who has inspired me to be my best self every day since the time we met. This year brought a significant change for Jennifer and me. She was offered a position at another company, one that came with a very high salary and an incredible opportunity for her career growth. When she first told me about the offer, I couldn't have been more proud of her. She's always been hardworking and ambitious, and this job seemed like the perfect next step for her career. Even though it meant we would no longer be working at the same company, I encouraged her to accept the position. I knew it was a chance she couldn't pass up, and I wanted to support her in every way I could. From the moment she started at her new job, Jennifer was filled with excitement. She would come home every evening with stories about her coworkers, her boss, and all the interesting things that happened throughout her day. I loved hearing about her experiences. It was clear that she was thriving in her new environment, and that made me really happy. However, with her new job came some changes to our daily routine also. Her work hours are different from mine now, which means I usually get home earlier than she does. Hence, I've taken on the responsibility of cooking dinner each night, which I actually enjoy. It's become a way for me to unwind after my day and do something nice for Jennifer. After dinner, she handles washing the dishes, which is a small way for us to share the household chores. During dinners, we sit down, enjoy the meal I've prepared, and talk about our days. Whether she's sharing the latest office gossip or I'm telling her about something funny that happened at work, these conversations are a way for us to stay connected despite our busy schedules. After dinner, we often settle in for the evening by watching a movie or just spending quiet time together. Sometimes, we'll pick a movie we've both been wanting to see, and other times we'll just relax and chat, enjoying each other's company. It's these moments, the everyday, ordinary ones, that I cherish the most. They remind me of why I fell in love with Jennifer in the first place and how grateful I am to have her in my life. However, about 2 months into Jennifer's new job, I started noticing some changes in her that caught me off guard. It wasn't just one thing, but a series of small, subtle shifts in her behavior and appearance that, when added up, made me feel like something was different. For as long as I've known Jennifer, she's always had a particular style when it came to her work attire. She's a professional through and through, and she's always dressed the part. Typically, she would wear a well-tailored suit or something similarly appropriate for the office. But suddenly, that changed. She began wearing outfits that seemed a bit more revealing or, to put it another way, less conservative than what I was used to seeing her in. Instead of her usual suits, she started opting for sleeveless tops and other pieces that showed a bit more skin. Now, I'm not exactly an expert when it comes to women's fashion, and I've always believed that Jennifer has every right to dress in a way that makes her feel confident and comfortable. I know that fashion is personal, and I've never felt it was my place to comment on what she chooses to wear. So, I didn't say anything about it. I just quietly observed and kept my opinions to myself. Around the same time, I noticed that Jennifer started waking up much earlier than she used to, about 2 hours earlier, in fact, to get ready for the office. It wasn't just the early rise that caught my attention, but what she was doing with that extra time. She began spending a lot more time getting ready for work, meticulously applying makeup, and paying particular attention to her appearance. One thing that really stood out to me was her sudden affinity for red lipstick. Now, here's the thing, in all the years we've been together, Jennifer has never been one to wear red lipstick. Even at parties or special events, she would always go for more neutral or subtle shades. In her words, red was just never her color, or at least that's what she used to say. So, seeing her suddenly embrace this bold choice was, well, a bit surprising. I couldn't help but feel curious about what might have prompted this change, but again, I kept my thoughts to myself. I figured maybe she was just experimenting with new styles or trying out a different look for her new job. After all, people change and evolve, and I didn't want to jump to any conclusions. The next thing that really caught my attention was when Jennifer started packing lunch for 2 people instead of just for herself. Now, both Jennifer and I are really into eating healthy, and to make things easier during the week, I've always taken on the task of meal prepping for both of us over the weekend. It's something I enjoy doing, and it ensures we have nutritious meals ready to go, without the need to cook during our busy workdays. I've always kept a close count of our meals, making sure we had just the right amount to last us through the week. But then, I started noticing that our prepped meals were depleting faster than usual. At first, I didn't think much of it. I just figured maybe we were both eating a bit more or that I'd miscounted somehow. However, when I found myself needing to cook additional meals midweek, a situation that shouldn't have happened if I had prepped enough food, I realized something was off. One evening, I decided to bring it up with Jennifer. I casually asked her if she was feeling hungrier lately or if perhaps she was taking extra lunches to work. I tried to make it sound as light as possible, not wanting to seem accusatory or overly concerned. After all, it was just food, and I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. To my surprise, Jennifer seemed a bit hesitant at first, but then she admitted that she had been packing lunch for a coworker. She explained that there was someone in her office who didn't like to eat much and often skipped meals. Jennifer, being the kind and considerate person she is, didn't want her coworkers to go hungry, so she started taking an extra meal to share with them. I understood where she was coming from. It's just like Jennifer to want to take care of others, and I admire her for that. She never elaborated anything about this so-called coworker, and I never asked. I simply told her that it was fine, and from the next weekend on, I made sure to prep more meals so that Jennifer could continue taking lunch for her coworker without us running out of food at home. Even though I made these adjustments without fuss, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. The changes were too sudden, too out of character for the Jennifer I knew so well. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, and I certainly didn't want to come across as controlling or judgmental. But deep down, I couldn't help but wonder what was really going on with my wife. Then, the biggest red flag came up when one night Jennifer and I were sitting down for dinner, talking about our day as usual. I started telling her about something that had happened at work. One of my coworkers had just discovered that his wife had been cheating on him. The news had devastated him, and as his friend, I couldn't help but feel terrible for him. I shared with Jennifer how sad and heartbroken he was, and how all of us at work felt bad for him. We were all shocked that his wife had destroyed their family for what seemed like her own selfish reasons. I thought it was just another conversation, but something I said must have struck a nerve with Jennifer. Instead of sharing my sympathy for the guy, she suddenly became defensive, arguing that maybe it was the husband's fault. She suggested that perhaps the wife had been unhappy for a long time, and that's why she cheated. This completely threw me off. It wasn't the reaction I was expecting from Jennifer at all. Trying to make sense of her response, I calmly pointed out that if the wife was that unhappy, she could have chosen to leave the marriage rather than stay with her husband and betray him like that. To me, it seemed clear that cheating was a cowardly and selfish way to handle things. But Jennifer didn't see it that way. She argued back, saying that sometimes people don't have the courage to leave because they're still unsure. I couldn't help but scoff when I heard that. I told her that in my opinion, people who cheat are just cowards who don't deserve loyal partners. I was simply expressing my opinion and we weren't even arguing, but she seemed deeply offended. Jennifer's voice rose as she told me that not everyone can be brave and that sometimes people make mistakes because they're scared about their decisions. Then, before I could even fully process what was happening, she stormed off, leaving me sitting there, dumbfounded and confused. I was left staring at my half-finished dinner, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I had no idea why Jennifer was so bothered by this conversation, but it made me question what was really going on with her. I couldn't help but wonder if there was something she wasn't telling me, something that might explain the changes I've been noticing over the past few months. This wasn't the Jennifer I knew, and it made me feel like there was a distance growing between us, a gap that I didn't know how to bridge. Then things became worse between us after that night. It was like a switch had been flipped, and the connection we once had began to fade. Jennifer, who had always been so present and engaged in our life together, started to drift away. She began spending less and less time with me, and her behavior became increasingly distant. She would come home unusually late, well past the time I'd expect her back from work. I'd sit there, waiting for her, hoping we could still have dinner together as we always did. But when she finally walked through the door, she wasn't interested in talking much with me, and when she did, it was clear her mind was somewhere else. Our conversations became forced and awkward. I also noticed that Jennifer was spending a lot more time on her phone or disappearing into the washroom for long stretches. It wasn't like her to be so secretive, and it only added to the growing sense of unease I was feeling. I'm a simple, straightforward guy. I've never been the type to play detective or dwell on suspicions. But as the days went on, it became harder and harder to ignore the signs that something was wrong. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know what was going on, so I confronted Jennifer directly. I asked her if she was cheating on me. I tried to be calm and rational about it. I didn't want to beat around the bush or let my suspicions fester in silence. When I asked her, Jennifer's reaction was immediate and defensive. She argued that I had no right to accuse her of something so vile, and she seemed genuinely hurt by my question. She told me that she wasn't having an affair, but that she was just going through a lot at work and dealing with work-related stress. She insisted that this was just a phase she was going through since she was still taking time to adjust in her new company and that she would be fine once things settled down. Despite her explanation, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Her defensiveness only made me more suspicious, but I didn't want to push her too hard. I decided to keep my mouth shut for the time being, even though my instincts were telling me that something wasn't right. The next day, Jennifer herself approached me and apologized for how things had been between us. She acknowledged that she had been neglecting me in our relationship, and she promised that she would do better. Her apology seemed sincere, and for a moment, I wanted to believe that maybe she was telling the truth, that it really was just a rough patch at work and nothing more. Then, one evening, everything changed when I received an unexpected call from a close friend. He asked me if I knew where Jennifer was, and his question caught me off guard. My friend isn't the type to meddle in other people's business, so the fact that he was reaching out like this immediately raised red flags. It was late during a workday, and I had assumed Jennifer was still at the office, finishing up some last-minute tasks or maybe working late, as she sometimes did. But then my friend told me something that made my heart sink. He told me how he had seen Jennifer at a restaurant, having dinner with another man. According to my friend, they seemed unusually close, and it wasn't just a casual dinner between colleagues. He mentioned that Jennifer was laughing, leaning in close, and even stroking the man's hand in a way that didn't seem appropriate for someone who was just a coworker. He told me that under normal circumstances, he wouldn't have thought to call me, but given how intimate they appeared, he felt compelled to let me know. I thanked him for telling me, even though I could barely process what he was saying. After we hung up, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. My friend then sent me a subtle picture he had managed to take of Jennifer with the guy at the restaurant. When I looked at the photo, my heart sank further. Jennifer was smiling and she was clearly comfortable with this man. There was something familiar about him that I couldn't quite place. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen this guy before, but I couldn't pinpoint where or when. That night, when Jennifer finally came home, I decided to play it cool. I asked her if she wanted to have dinner with me like we usually did. Without much thought, she shook her head and casually mentioned that she had already eaten at a team dinner with her coworkers. I kept my tone light and nonchalant, asking how many people were at this dinner, just to see what she would say. She didn't hesitate before responding, telling me that almost all of her coworkers were there. It was at that moment that I realized that my wife was lying to me. She clearly had something to hide, otherwise she would have had no issues telling me about having dinner with a mysterious man. I kept my mouth shut and pretended everything was fine. But inside, I was determined to get to the bottom of this. The Jennifer I knew wouldn't have lied to me so easily, and I needed to know who that man was, what he meant to her, and why she was keeping this part of her life hidden from me. That night, after Jennifer went to bed early, claiming she was tired from drinking too much at her team dinner. As I watched her sleep, the weight of everything that had happened in the past few weeks pressed down on me, and I knew I had to find out the truth. Quietly, I waited until she was deep in sleep before carefully taking her phone from the nightstand. I noticed right away that she had changed her password, which was unusual since we always were pretty open about our devices and had no secrets. I knew I had to get into her phone somehow. Now, Jennifer is a very forgetful person, so I was certain that she would have chosen something simple as her password, something she could easily remember. My heart was pounding as I tried to recall the usual combinations she might use: birthdays, anniversaries, or even her parents' birthdays. I went through the list in my head, trying each one with trembling hands, praying that I could crack the password before the phone got disabled. Luckily, my fourth attempt worked and the screen unlocked. I knew I was crossing a line, but I felt like I had no choice. I needed to know what was going on, even if it meant invading her privacy. With my heart racing, I scrolled through her messages, dreading what I might find. I noticed she had been sending multiple messages to someone named Mark. They talked regularly and even exchanged selfies. I read through the messages and realized that he also worked at her company. Then, I clicked on Mark's contact information to check his profile picture, but as soon as I did, everything finally clicked. This was Mark, the very same guy Jennifer had dated back in high school. They had been high school sweethearts, inseparable until he had to go abroad because of his family's decision. I remembered Jennifer telling me about him when we first started dating. She shared how they had tried to make the long-distance relationship work, but eventually, they had to give up because the distance was too much to handle. It was a story from her past, one that I had thought was long behind us. But here he was, back in her life, and it was clear from the messages that their connection had rekindled. My hands shook as I read through their conversation, each word feeling like a dagger to my heart. They weren't just catching up like old friends, they were talking in a way that made it clear there was something more between them now. The way they addressed each other, the way they reminisced about old times, and the way they talked about their feelings, it was all too much to bear. My wife sent him a morning selfie every day after she would get ready for work, and he would reply back saying how beautiful she looked. They had also sent some inappropriate messages to each other which made me almost puke. The worst part was that there were a few pictures of them in a hotel bed, just kissing and gazing into each other's eyes. It was like a nightmare coming to life. The woman I loved, the woman I had built my life with, was cheating on me. I felt a wave of betrayal, anger, and sadness wash over me as I realized that everything had changed. Jennifer hadn't just been hiding this from me, she had been lying to me, to my face, while she rekindled something with a man from her past. I took screenshots of all her chats with me and sent them to my phone. I then wiped off the evidence from her end so she would never find out that I now had evidence of her cheating. I carefully placed her phone back on the nightstand, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. I wanted to burst out crying, but despite everything I had uncovered, there was still a very small part of me that hoped that maybe, just maybe, Jennifer still cared about me and wasn't really going to leave me for this guy. I didn't want to believe that our years together could be so easily discarded. I wanted to fight for our relationship, for us. So, for the next few days, I kept to myself, trying to come to terms with the facts about her affair. As much as I wanted to give up, I still loved Jennifer and wanted to see things through. During this time, I was quiet and distant, and I could tell that Jennifer noticed something was off. But she never asked me anything about it. She just didn't seem concerned about me any longer. Then, about a week later, Jennifer told me that she had a work trip coming up. I pointed out how this work trip coincidentally fell during our anniversary, hoping to get some kind of reaction from her, something that would show she still cared about us. In my head, I had been planning to host a small party with our family and friends, something to remind us of the bond we shared, to remind her of the life we had built together. I had been with her through so much, standing by her side through thick and thin, and I couldn't understand how she could so easily push me aside for the other guy. Jennifer claimed she had no idea that our anniversary was coming up, which hurt more than I could put into words. How could she forget something so important to us? She offered a half-hearted apology, saying she was sorry to miss it, but then seeing my disappointment, she immediately backtracked, saying that she would talk to her boss and try to come back home one day before our anniversary so we could celebrate it together. I told her about my plan to invite some of our family members and friends, and she immediately agreed, telling me that it was a great idea. Hearing her reaction, I felt hopeful, so I went ahead and invited people as planned. Throughout Jennifer's so-called work trip, every time I called or messaged her, she would ignore me. It wasn't like her to be so distant, and as each day passed, my worry grew. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. In a desperate attempt to understand what was going on, I decided to turn to social media. I didn't have much to go on, but I knew Mark's full name and figured he might have an Instagram profile. I didn't know if he was on this work trip with Jennifer or not, but I needed to know more. After some searching, I found his profile and started to stalk it, my heart pounding with every click. Imagine my shock, my devastation, when I saw Jennifer in his Instagram stories. He had posted several clips and photos from the trip, and while there were a few other coworkers in some of the shots, the ones that stood out, the ones that made my blood run cold, were the ones of him and Jennifer. They were together in most of them, smiling, laughing, kissing each other on the cheek, looking far too comfortable, far too close. They looked like a couple. My heart shattered as I scrolled through each story. My worst fears were confirmed. I realized at that moment that I had truly lost my wife. I didn't want to see any more of their pictures together, and I didn't want Mark to see that I had viewed his stories. The last thing I needed was for him to tell Jennifer that I had been stalking his profile. So, I blocked him, hoping that I could delete those pictures from my head as well. Throughout the night, I cried myself to sleep. Currently, as I sit here and write this, I feel utterly betrayed and defeated. Our anniversary is tomorrow and my wife is supposed to come home today. I don't know how I can face her and celebrate with her after she has been shamelessly out having an affair with another man. Will I be an a-hole if I cancel our anniversary party tomorrow as I feel like there's nothing left to celebrate? Update 1. Wow, in just a matter of a few hours, I have received hundreds of DMs from people on Reddit. I would like to thank each and every one of you for checking up on me and assuring me that I can go ahead and cancel the anniversary party if I want to. I did send out a group text earlier saying that the party is cancelled, however people have been calling me and asking if something is wrong. I don't have the heart to tell anyone anything until I have confronted Jennifer. Today, when my wife returned from her work trip, she was really upset with me for cancelling the party without discussing it with her first. She believes some of our family members now think something is up. I've tried to bring up the work trip to get her to talk about Mark, but she is stonewalling me and keeps saying that we can talk about her trip after the party. She has been insisting to me that we go ahead with the party as originally planned. Update 2. It's been a week since I last updated. I listened to some of your advice and decided to be petty just like my wife and to teach her a lesson. I agreed to host the party as planned and asked her to re-invite everyone. Throughout the event, I watched her mingle with our family and friends, playing the role of the perfect wife in front of everyone. When it was my turn to give a speech to thank everyone for coming to our anniversary party, I decided to use this opportunity to reveal the truth. I'm not one for theatrics, so I spoke plainly. I told everyone that this was going to be our last anniversary party since I had discovered my wife had been having an affair with Mark, her high school sweetheart, for months. Jennifer froze when she heard my words, looking like a deer caught in headlights. I told the guests that I had seen all her messages, inappropriate pictures they had sent to each other, and photos of them together in a hotel room. I explained that even after discovering all this, I still wanted to give her a chance, but after her behavior during her work trip where she spent all her time with Mark, I was pretty much done with her. Everyone was shocked by what I had revealed. My mother, visibly upset, began yelling at Jennifer, demanding to know if it was true. Even Jennifer's own parents, who had always liked me, pressed her to speak up. In the end, my wife broke down in front of everyone. She admitted to everything and begged for my forgiveness, saying that she had foolishly gone with the flow and didn't know how to stop things with Mark as she just felt so comfortable around him. She admitted that she met him a few months ago when he joined her team at her new workplace after returning from abroad and that they had been sleeping together for months behind my back. She then went on to claim that she couldn't tell me the truth since I was the only love of her life and she didn't want to lose me. I just shook my head in disappointment as I then announced to everyone that I would be divorcing Jennifer since I could no longer live my life with someone who was this shameless. There was not even one single word of protest as everyone agreed with me. Ever since then, I have kicked Jennifer out of my place. She is furious with me for exposing her in front of everyone and for turning our anniversary party into her farewell party. She has continued to reach out to me several times in hopes that I would give our marriage another try, but I have chosen to completely ignore her. Update 3. I have finally found a great lawyer who is going to make sure that I won't have to pay a dime to Jennifer during our divorce. He's confident that, given the evidence of her cheating and the fact that we don't have kids, the divorce will be pretty straightforward. For those asking about my mental health, I guess I am still processing everything, but I do feel at peace with my decision to leave my wife. Thanks to the support from my family, I'm no longer feeling scared of my decision. I think I'm going to be okay. Parents refused to pay daughter's college tuition but fund nephew's education instead. Later grandparents cut them off from inheritance cause of me. I, 17F, am turning 18 in a few weeks and I'm supposed to start college in 2 months. I got accepted into my first choice about a month ago and I was thrilled about it. They have a great microbiology program, which is what I'm interested in. Unfortunately, my excitement only lasted until my parents told me that they couldn't afford to send me there and I had to pick my safety school instead because that was closer to home and would cost them a lot less. I got into an argument with them over it because it felt really awful that they told me to apply to whichever college I wanted to, but now that it was time to talk about the tuition, they were singing a different tune and were claiming not to have enough money to be able to afford the college I wanted to go to. My dad's a software engineer and my mom's the head of sales at a company and we live comfortably, so I didn't understand why exactly they were being such misers when it came to my education. I didn't even have any siblings that they had to worry about, and to be fair, the tuition was well within their budget. It just seemed unfair to me at the time, but they insisted that they'd go broke paying my tuition and wouldn't be able to save enough to retire. My parents are just in their early 40s, so I don't know what retirement they're talking about because they still have a good 20 or even more years to go. I argued with them over this for several days and I tried everything, from anger to begging and even bargaining, because I said that if they funded my education at the college of my choice then I'd pay the full amount back to them eventually and they wouldn't have to suffer any losses. They didn't give a damn and instead told me to start looking into student loans instead of wasting my time by arguing with them, or simply give up and go to my safety school instead. I wasn't too keen on the idea of taking a loan because of the risk involved, but after arguing for about a week, I realized that my parents were determined not to give me the money for some reason, and fighting for it would be futile. So I could either go to my safety school and give up on my dream college, or else I could take out a loan and then end up with a ton of debt like so many others, and both the possibilities seemed super bleak to me. I kept researching loans and their pros and cons, and I also applied for a scholarship, but I didn't give up hope. I did give up talking to my parents after our fight though, because they were being selfish and I just couldn't bring myself to forgive them for it. My parents and I have always had a strained relationship at best, because both of them were working individuals and were the kind of people who brought their work home with them. It was mostly my grandparents, my dad's parents. My mom's parents passed away before I was born, looking after me and taking care of me while I was a child, and once I was old enough to be home by myself, they'd leave me alone for hours while they were out for work. Even when they came back home, they weren't particularly interested in me and would only do the bare minimum. They'd talk to me at meals sometimes and ask me about school and my friends, but I could always tell they weren't interested, and I wouldn't try to talk to them either because it just seemed pointless. I'm gonna be blunt and just say it, to me my parents were nothing more than people who paid for things that I needed and would let me live with them. It sounds harsh and makes me seem like a total selfish brat, but you can't really blame me because it was my parents who never really bothered to make an emotional bond with me. And as a kid, I tried to get their attention and win them over, but I never could, so I gave up trying after a while since it was clearly pointless. As long as I had a roof over my head, clothes to wear, and food to eat, I was good. They'd sent me to a decent school, I had good grades, and now I wanted to go to a reputed college so I could land a well-paying job after it. They were going to pay for it because I knew they had that sort of money, and that was the way it was supposed to be. That's the way it has always been. I didn't expect my parents to shower me with love and affection or even tell me that they were proud of me because of what I'd achieved, but I did expect them to fund my education at the very least, because that's the one area where they hadn't let me down yet. But unfortunately, now they'd failed as parents there as well. I'm not saying this because they refused to pay for my education, but because about 2 weeks ago, I found out that they were paying for my cousin's education instead. My dad has an older brother and they have a son who's the same age as I am. He's starting college around the same time, and we do have a couple of friends in common. One of these common friends sent me a picture that my cousin had posted a picture with my parents, who were smiling broadly while hugging him. In the caption of that picture, he thanked my parents for agreeing to sponsor his education and pushing him to chase after his dreams. My cousin had probably blocked me at my parents' request since I couldn't see his profile at all. I hadn't even noticed because he and I weren't close. My friend wasn't aware of my situation and had just sent that screenshot to me to tell me how kind and generous my parents were. She had no clue that they were also really horrible and were putting their own daughter's dreams and ambitions aside just to be able to fuel someone else's. On one hand, they claimed that they couldn't afford to send me to the college of my choice, but they had absolutely no issues sponsoring my cousin's education. And he was attending a college that was a lot more expensive than mine, so the things they'd told me just didn't add up at all. It also made no sense that his father wasn't paying for his tuition because my uncle was a high school teacher at a private school and made enough money to be able to provide for his son. Or at least I think he does, because judging by their house, they don't live too shabbily, and I'm sure they can afford it if they want to. His mom's not in the picture anymore, but they do co-parent him and she's a journalist, as far as I know. So it's definitely not about the money for them. My parents weren't at home when I found out, as usual, and I wanted to confront them about it, but I was so pissed off that I decided to go to my grandparents first instead. I share a good relationship with my grandparents, but I hadn't told them anything about what I was going through because my grandma was kind of sick and I didn't want to be a burden on them. They were reasonably well off and had retired a couple of years back after handing over the reins of their textile business to my great uncle. It had been the three of them running the business earlier, but my grandparents chose to retire once they hit 60. My great uncle was still in his mid-50s and had no intention of retiring for a while since he had no family and only wanted to work and travel. All of them still earned well from the business they'd set up together, but my parents had never relied on them for money and had taught me never to take money from them either. I never needed to anyway, so I was okay with it and didn't question it back then. My grandparents had always been very kind to me and had made me feel loved, which was a nice change of pace from the kind of treatment I was used to at my parents' place, so I'd visit them frequently in the past. Unfortunately, about a year ago, my grandmother was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and then it became kind of difficult for her to do the things she always used to do. So I stopped visiting as much as I used to because, like I already said, I didn't want to be a burden on them. This time, though, I couldn't just sit back and take this sort of bullcrap from my parents and my cousin, because it was very obvious that they'd all teamed up against me for some reason. They were sabotaging my chances of going to the college I wanted to on purpose, or at least that's what it looked like to me, and I couldn't just let that happen to me. So I headed over to my grandparents' place within an hour of finding out, and they welcomed me quite happily. I'd gone back to visit them after almost 2 months, and seeing them again made me regret not keeping in touch with them because both of them looked like they'd missed having me around. They looked thrilled to have me back, and that felt reassuring, so without wasting much time, I told them about what I'd found out. Even while narrating what had happened to them, I could feel the anger surging because it was all just so unfair. My cousin's grades weren't even as good as mine, and yet, for some reason, they'd chosen to sponsor him over their own daughter, and they'd even tried to cover it up. So had it not been for that one friend of mine, I might have never found out about their lies at all, and they would have been totally fine with it as well. After I was done telling my grandparents what had happened, they comforted me because I'd started crying while telling them about what I'd been going through. Both of them looked grim and just told me to go home, pack my clothes and any other important belongings, and then come back here. I was puzzled at their instructions, but honestly, I was sick of living in a house where I wouldn't speak to my parents and they wouldn't speak to me either, so I agreed without another word. At least earlier my parents would try to talk to me, even if it was meaningless small talk, but now that was all over and we just pretended that we were invisible to one another, which was awful. So I went back home, got my things, and came back to my grandparents' place, where they told me that my tuition would be taken care of by them and that I had nothing to worry about. I didn't understand what they'd done at the time, but I was just relieved that they'd found out a way to cover the expenses, because I really would have been devastated had I not been able to attend the college of my choice. I was worried about my grandparents' financial state though, because they were both retired, and since my grandmother would have to go to the hospital for medical checkups quite frequently, the hospital bills were bound to be quite high. I didn't want to cause them unnecessary trouble in any way, so I offered to work my way through, and they'd only need to cover half of my expenses that way, but they laughed it off and dismissed it, saying that they had enough money and that I didn't need to worry about them. I wanted to know how exactly they'd pay for everything when they were retired, but I didn't want to push any further and I didn't ask more. I hadn't told my parents anything before I left, so I had expected to hear from them when they found out that I wasn't at home. So I had indeed been expecting a call from them once they'd come back home from work, and just as I'd predicted, they reached out to me a little after dinner time. I'll be honest, I'd expected them to be upset with me because I'd left without telling them anything, and I'd wanted them to be worried for me. It's petty and makes me sound like an attention seeker, but I just really wanted them to call me out of concern and ask me about my whereabouts so I could finally tell them off about what kind of horrible parents they'd been to me, and then they'd finally feel sorry about what they'd done. Unfortunately, none of it materialized, because instead of a phone call from my concerned parents, all I received was a text from them telling me how incredibly disappointed they were in me and that they never even wanted to see me again, much less speak to me. Those were the very first lines of the message, and that threw me off because I hadn't been expecting it at all, but it got even worse as I continued reading their message. Apparently, my uncle had lost his teaching job a couple of weeks ago for insubordination. They didn't elaborate more, but I'm guessing it must have been something big enough for him to get fired, since he was a pretty qualified man. His ex-wife is getting remarried in a few months, so she wasn't willing to cover the cost of her son's college tuition either, and with all the bills and other household expenses, my uncle just couldn't afford to send my cousin to the college he wanted to go to. There had been a lot of outrage on my cousin's part when he got to know this, and had been threatening to run away from home, so my parents had stepped in and offered to sponsor him instead. He was planning to major in art, and so it was even more risky for my uncle to invest in his degree because it was unlikely that he'd be able to repay him soon after college. I'm not throwing shade at art majors, but just being realistic, and that was why my father believed that it would be better for them to pay for his education instead. They said that the reason they'd chosen to sponsor him over me was because he was more in need of it, while I could still get by with loans and such, he couldn't. I don't know how much of that was true, but that was what they told me. And the reason they were texting me to let me know was because earlier that day, presumably around the time that I'd left to collect my belongings and bring them to my grandparents' house, my grandparents had called my parents and told them that they were cutting all of them out of their will and all of it would go to me instead, since they decided to choose my cousin over me. That was why my parents were furious at me for telling my grandparents what they'd done instead of discussing it with them first, which, I guess, might be a fair point. I don't know if they have a point or not, to be really honest, but I do think that what they did was still kind of messed up. I understand that this was coming from a place of concern for my cousin, but even then, I should have been their first choice and not my cousin. That just really hurt me, and I think anyone else in my place would have felt the same way, so when I received the text from my parents, I didn't respond to it because I didn't know what they'd expected me to say. I believe they wanted me to apologize to them and my cousin and then prevent my grandparents from changing their will, but I didn't think that would be fair to me at all, because if anything, I'd been the one who had been wronged by them and not the other way around. A week has passed since I received that message and I still haven't heard back from anyone in my family. I'm still living with my grandparents and it's relatively more pleasant than living with my parents, but that text just keeps bugging me because I feel like I might have messed things up a little for everyone involved. It's true that I could have gotten by with student loans, but even my cousin could have gone that way, and yet he'd chosen not to, but I was expected to, just because he was being an immature brat who thought running away from home was a reasonable solution to his problems. I'd always known my cousin to be kind of bratty and downright annoying when he wouldn't get his way, but I'd thought he'd grown out of that behavior. Unfortunately, he hasn't, and now I've had to bear the brunt of that. I don't know if I should talk to my grandparents about the inheritance thing though, because that's really their decision. At the same time, I don't need all that money, and I guess my parents and my uncle would need it in the future. I feel like I'm hoarding it and being cruel to them by depriving them of their inheritance and hogging it all to myself, and that I maybe should have at least talked to my parents before I came running to my grandparents to complain about what they'd done. So Ida for telling my grandparents that my parents were funding my cousin's education over mine and then taking over their entire inheritance? Update 1. Before I say anything, I'd just like to thank everyone who commented on my original post. It means the world to me since apparently now literal strangers on the internet have more compassion for me than my own family does. You guys are just really sweet to be so supportive of me. I'd also like to say that since I drew some flack for what I said about me considering my parents my source of money and nothing else, what else was I supposed to think of them when they raised me like that? I already discussed that ever since I was a kid, they'd leave me all by myself at home for hours for work and there was barely any emotional relationship between us, so of course I couldn't see them as anything except my source of money and that's all. And of course, I still expected them to be concerned about me and worried about me when I left because they're still my parents and despite everything, I still want some affect and validation from them like literally any other kid does. I've had a complicated childhood and I don't expect everyone to understand my feelings or be empathetic towards me, but some of you people need to tone down the hate. Anyway, I decided not to talk to my parents again and even blocked them after speaking to my grandparents regarding their text. I just couldn't keep it in anymore and ended up telling them all about it like most of you had advised me to. And they told me that it was ridiculous of them to expect that I'd be okay with them paying for my cousin for whatever reason, and if my uncle needed money then he should have come to his parents instead of his brother. But for some reason, both my dad and his brother have an insanely high ego and refuse to take any sort of money from my grandparents at all. My grandpa believes that it's because they'd had to live really frugally while growing up because their business was still in its beginning stages and they weren't making much, so their kids couldn't afford the kind of life that their friends were used to, which made them resent my grandparents because according to them, had they just stuck to their regular jobs instead of quitting and establishing their own business, then they wouldn't have had to give up any luxuries that they'd been used to. And that in turn made them really weird about taking money from their parents. My grandma believes that the real reason that they were so uptight about borrowing money from them was because both of them were just too proud and too arrogant to admit that they needed help and would rather suffer and make their kids suffer than just ask their parents for money. Both of those theories are plausible, in my opinion. And it's not even like my grandparents would have said no if their sons had ever asked for help because they still made decent money from their business, which was up and running really well. They could now afford to stay home and relax and let my great uncle handle it all at work, which means it's all going well for them right now, and will continue to do well in the foreseeable future. They just have no real excuse as to why they picked my cousin over me, and that's the bottom line. Update 2. It's been almost 2 weeks since I moved out of my parents' house, and today, after 2 whole weeks, my parents finally showed up at my grandparents' place and demanded that I come back with them. I obviously said no right away and told them that I didn't want to go back with them at all, but they refused to listen and said that they'd call the cops and have my grandparents arrested for abduction if they didn't let me go back with them. That was what made me fly off the handle entirely, and I started screaming at them at the top of my lungs about how they're the ones who should have been arrested because they're the ones who neglected me my entire childhood. They were the ones who were still putting their own brotherhood above me and couldn't be bothered to think about me just because they felt that my idiot of a cousin was going to run away for real, and that was something that justified what they did to me. I felt a lot lighter after my tirade against my parents because it felt like years and years of anger, bitterness, pain, and resentment were making their way out of my body, and it honestly felt like I was spewing poison. My mother started to cry at some point, but they didn't leave and waited for me to stop yelling before my dad told me that he was super disappointed in the way I'd turned out and that he wished he'd never come back to take me with him and make things right. When I demanded an explanation as to what he meant by make things right, he told me that he'd been planning to put me in touch with a friend of his who worked at a bank and would make it easier for me to get a loan, and then I wouldn't have to worry about my tuition anymore. At that moment, I was so furious that I felt like pushing my parents out of the house. His idea of making amends wasn't giving me what was rightfully mine, my college fund, but instead he believed that putting me in touch with a banker would make it all okay for me. I couldn't believe that he'd even had the audacity to say that, and I could feel another fit of rage coming on, but luckily, my grandparents asked them to leave me alone and not come back. I'd be 18 in a couple of weeks anyway, and I really didn't need their consent to live with whoever I wanted to anymore. And even if I wasn't 18, I would rather go to prison than go back to living with my parents. Their emotional unavailability and arrogance almost ruined my life once. I wasn't about to let it happen once again. They're gone now, and just to make sure they can't take any legal action against my grandparents for letting me stay here, we're also in talks with an attorney. My grandparents were sweet enough to apologize to me for not taking me away from my irresponsible parents back when I was a kid so I wouldn't have had to face all of this in the first place, but I don't think that's their fault anyway. I'm disappointed that my parents turned out to be like this, but I can't say I'm surprised. This was always going to happen at some point, it was just a matter of when. They've let me down countless times, but now I'm not letting them do this to me anymore. We're done and I'm finally gonna be free from them now. Update 3, just experienced my first day of college and boy, was it a great day. My parents are no longer in the picture, so it's just my grandparents, a couple of friends, and you guys who get to hear about it. Well, at least until I make a couple of new friends. I just hope that the next couple of months treat me just as well as today did. My grandparents are very proud of me and I feel so thankful that I have such an amazing support system to back me up. My parents forced me to live in the garage while my special brother got 2 rooms. When they needed emergency housing after the hurricane, I reminded them the garage is still available. You know when something feels off, but you can't quite put your finger on it. Like there's a piece of the puzzle that doesn't fit, but it's too small to notice unless you're looking closely. That's how I always felt growing up in my house. It wasn't some big glaring thing at first, just little moments, a quiet observation here and there. But when I look back now, I realize there was always this underlying tension between my brother and me. One I couldn't put into words back then. We were supposed to be a family, right? But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like there were two different sets of rules in our house. I remember the first time I realized something wasn't right. I was about 12, and my brother, Ezra, was 9. We had just moved into a new house, and while it was bigger, my parents told me I was going to live in the garage. They said it was because I was older and would need more privacy, and the garage was just as good as any room in the house. It was close to the main living area, and I'd have space to myself. No big deal, right? Except, that wasn't the whole story. I wasn't exactly getting more privacy. I was getting less space than Ezra. And not just less space, way less. I mean, my brother had 2 whole rooms, one for sleeping and another one as a playroom. But they told me the garage was fine, that I'd have my own little corner to make it work. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, I was the older sibling. I should have been mature enough to handle it, right? But there were little things that started to bug me. One afternoon, I asked my mom, Melanie, if I could move into one of the extra rooms inside the house. It wasn't like I was asking for something unreasonable. I was just tired of hearing the creaks of the garage door every time I tried to sleep, and honestly, I wanted to feel like I was part of the family, not like I was living in some kind of shed. My mom was in the kitchen, making dinner, and I figured it was as good a time as any to bring it up. You know, Mom, I was thinking, maybe I could take one of the rooms inside. Just for a change, maybe something a little less garagey, I said, trying to sound casual, like it wasn't a big deal. But even as the words left my mouth, I could tell by the look on her face that it was a big deal. Hudson, she sighed, wiping her hands on a dish towel. We've talked about this before. Ezra needs more space for his things. You know how important his art is to him. It's not just about the room, it's about giving him the right environment to focus. I just stared at her, trying to wrap my head around it. The art. I wasn't even allowed to have art supplies in the garage, let alone an art studio like Ezra had. He had one of those fancy easels, special lights, canvases stacked in every corner, and here I was, trying to work on school projects at a rickety desk. She didn't even look at me when she said it. You're fine, honey. You've got your space. It's good for you. Think of it like your own little retreat. It didn't feel like a retreat. It felt like an afterthought. I didn't argue after that. What was the point? I was 12, and my mom was the one who made the rules. But as the months went by, the unfairness of it started to really stick with me. I'd walk by Ezra's rooms, his double rooms, and feel this odd knot in my stomach. It was more than just jealousy. I couldn't understand why he needed so much. Why did I get the garage while he got 2 rooms? There was this one night that really stood out to me. Ezra had a couple of his friends over. They were laughing loudly, throwing pillows at each other, making a mess in the living room. I was sitting in the garage, trying to focus on my homework, but it was impossible. The noise from inside the house felt like it was suffocating me. I could hear them all having fun while I sat there alone, in the cold, with barely any light. I went inside, hoping to grab a snack or something to help me focus, and as I walked through the kitchen, I caught a glimpse of my parents sitting at the table with Ezra. His friends were still playing in the living room, but my mom and dad were looking at him with this strange mix of pride and concern. It was like they were having a serious conversation about his future plans, and I couldn't help but overhear bits of it. Ezra's been so focused lately. His art's really taking off. We need to encourage him, my dad, Dylan, was saying. I froze in the doorway. I hadn't even realized Ezra was into art that much. I mean, I knew he drew sometimes, but it never seemed like that big of a deal. Why was it suddenly this thing that everyone had to tiptoe around? I stayed silent for a moment, and then, before I even realized what I was doing, I spoke up. I don't get it. Why does he need 2 rooms for his art? I don't even have one. Everyone stopped talking, and I felt my heart skip a beat. My mom's face fell as she looked at me, almost like she was guilty of something. I was expecting an explanation, but instead, she just gave me one of those tired sighs, like it was an old conversation they didn't want to have again. Honey, you know Ezra has special needs, right? She said softly, like she was speaking to a child who just didn't understand. His needs are different from yours. I felt like someone had just punched me in the gut. Special needs? I repeated, my voice shaking slightly. I don't have special needs. Ezra looked at me from across the room, and for the first time, I felt like he was genuinely confused. It wasn't that he was being malicious, but I could see in his eyes that he just didn't understand why I was upset. My parents never explained it to him. They never said it outright, but in that moment I realized that the way they treated him was different, and they made me feel like I was the one who had something to prove. I didn't stick around for the rest of the conversation. I went back to the garage, slamming the door behind me, not caring who heard. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I had ever been told about fairness, about family, was a lie. To be honest, I didn't know what to do about it yet. I was just starting to feel like I had no place in my own home. My brother had 2 rooms, and I had a garage, but I wasn't going to let it slide anymore. And that's when I decided to finally say something. Update. I remember the first time I came back from college after a long semester away. It wasn't the typical excitement of coming home. It was more like stepping back into a familiar, uncomfortable room I'd been avoiding for too long. I could still smell the faint trace of old wood and dust from the garage, and that oddly cold air that always seemed to linger there, no matter how much I tried to make it feel like a real room. But that was the thing. It wasn't a real room. It was just a space that was there, an afterthought. And I was so tired of it. When I walked in, Ezra was sitting on the couch in the living room, flipping through his sketchbook. He didn't even look up when I entered, too absorbed in whatever he was drawing. I could tell right away that nothing had changed, that nothing ever would. The house still revolved around him, his needs, his talents. The world felt like it was tailored around Ezra and his special abilities, and I was still just there. Mom was in the kitchen, doing what she always did when I came home, cooking, bustling around like she had something to prove. It wasn't that I hated her for it, but I couldn't help but feel like the kitchen was her world, not mine. It was like she kept me at arm's length, just out of sight. "Hey Hudson, how was the semester?" she asked brightly, turning around with that fake cheerfulness she always used when she was nervous. "It was fine," I said, setting my bag down in the hallway. You know, the usual. There was something in her tone when she spoke next that caught me off guard. "Oh good. Ezra's been working on some amazing new pieces. He's really been flourishing lately." I didn't know why it hit me like it did, but it did. I mean, I'd heard all this before. It wasn't new information, but for some reason, hearing her say it in that overly proud way made my blood boil. She was practically glowing with pride, and there I was, stuck in the background. "I'm sure he's great," I said, a little more coldly than I intended. I tried to walk past her, but she stepped into the hallway, blocking my way. "Honey, you should see some of his new sketches. He's been invited to a couple of art shows, you know." I blinked, suddenly feeling like I was caught in a loop. "Yeah, I get it, he's amazing. He's got everything figured out." I could feel the frustration bubbling in my chest, but I kept it under control, at least outwardly. "Maybe I'll go take a look at the art later." I wasn't sure why I said it, but there it was, and I saw her flinch. For a split second, she looked hurt, and I couldn't figure out if that was because I'd snapped at her or because I'd finally called out the elephant in the room. Maybe it was both. I spent the next few days trying to figure out how to deal with it. How to make them see what I'd been dealing with all these years. How to confront the fact that I was constantly being put in the shadows while Ezra basked in the spotlight. It was the same story over and over. Ezra was praised. Ezra was the one who got attention. Ezra was the one everyone worried about. Meanwhile I was just there. The good kid who didn't need anything special. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. I think what really got to me was how it all seemed so effortless for him. He never had to ask for anything. He didn't have to beg for his room. He didn't have to earn it. It was just given to him. And no one ever questioned it. There was this moment that crystallized everything for me. One of those moments where the veil of normalcy just slips and you finally see things as they are. I came back into the living room one afternoon to find Ezra, in his 2-room setup, sprawled out on the floor with his sketchbook. My mom, of course, was sitting next to him, giving him that soft, indulgent smile that she never gave me. I don't even remember what she was saying, but I remember feeling like I couldn't breathe in that room. Like I wasn't supposed to be there. Like I didn't belong. That was the last straw. I had to get out of there. I packed up my things, took my stuff back to my apartment in the city and tried to get some distance. I didn't call, didn't check in. I needed a break and honestly, I was sick of playing this game. Sick of being the understanding one who always just went along with the narrative they'd created. The narrative that I wasn't worthy of the same space as Ezra. I don't know if I fully understood it at the time, but I was angry, no, furious, that my parents couldn't see me, couldn't see what they were doing. Months passed. I barely spoke to them, barely answered calls. I was living my life in the city, working, meeting people, figuring out who I was outside of the good kid role they'd stuck me in. But even so, I kept hearing about Ezra's shows, his accomplishments. My mom would send me pictures of his work, updates on his progress, little snippets of prideful details, but they all felt like insults now. Every time I saw one of those pictures, I felt like I was being reminded of everything I wasn't. Then, one day, it all came to a head. I was in a coffee shop when my phone buzzed with a text from my mom. I almost didn't look at it, but something made me check. It was a simple message. "Hudson, we really need to talk. Ezra is going through something. Could you please come home?" My stomach dropped. I didn't even know what going through something meant anymore. Was he sick? Was he just being extra again? What the hell could it be now? I didn't reply right away. I was mad. Angry? It had been months of them living in their world, never even noticing mine, and now they needed me to help? To do what? Fix things? Fix Ezra? I didn't know if I could do that anymore. But I did the one thing I swore I wouldn't. I went back. Final update. It's strange how life throws curveballs when you least expect them. One minute, I was in the city, living my life, staying away from my family, and the next minute, I was on a plane back home. Not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. The hurricane had hit. It came in fast, Category 4, unpredictable, and the news was everywhere. My parents, of course, were in the direct line of it. I didn't even have to get the phone call from my mom. I knew the moment I saw the weather alerts and the flood warnings that they would reach out. And sure enough, the next day, my phone buzzed with a text from Melanie. "Hudson, please, we need your help. Ezra, we're not sure what we're going to do. The house is damaged and we're stuck here. Can you come?" I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the reply button. There was a part of me that wanted to ignore it, just let them figure it out. But I wasn't that heartless. Not yet. So I packed a bag and headed back. When I walked through the door, I didn't recognize the house. The hurricane had ripped through, flooding the lower floors. The furniture was scattered, debris everywhere. My parents were already holed up in the living room, looking frazzled but managing to hold it together. Ezra was sitting in the corner of the room, sketching in his notebook, his usual obliviousness to the world around him on full display. He didn't even look up when I entered. That's Ezra for you, always lost in his own world. Melanie was the first to speak, looking up at me with a forced smile. "Hudson, thank you for coming. I know this is all a lot, but we really need your help." I nodded, still trying to process everything. It wasn't like I was expecting a big reunion, but I thought I'd at least get a "hey, it's been a while," or something. But nothing. The elephant in the room was impossible to ignore. "Well, I'm here," I said as neutrally as I could manage. "What do you need?" "We don't have enough space. Everything's destroyed downstairs. Can you let us stay in your place for a little while, just until the repairs are done?" Melanie asked, her voice hesitant. I knew what she was really asking. They wanted to move in my space. I paused for a moment. Part of me wanted to snap. Part of me wanted to tell her exactly what she had put me through. The years of neglect and favoritism. The 2 rooms Ezra had while I got the garage. But I had to admit, I wasn't that cruel. I wasn't that guy anymore. I had worked hard to build my own life and I didn't want to let the past dictate who I was now. But that didn't mean I couldn't have a little fun with this. I didn't give her an answer immediately. I walked over to where Ezra was, still absorbed in his sketchbook, and leaned against the wall, staring at him. He didn't even look up as usual. It was always the same. He was special, and no one ever told him no. I hadn't made my peace with that yet. "Ezra," I said, my voice sharp enough to get his attention. "So, you and Mom want to move in here, huh?" Finally, Ezra looked up, confused. Yeah, it's just temporary, right? We'll be out of your hair once the house is fixed." It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. As if I didn't even matter in the equation. As if I wasn't the one who had lived through years of this same treatment. The words from before echoed in my head. Ezra needs space. Ezra has special needs. Ezra gets everything. I felt the anger flare up again. But this time, I wasn't going to hold back. Not this time. "Right," I said, turning back to Melanie, who was waiting for my answer. "About that." There was a silence. I could see her bracing herself, expecting me to say yes, because why wouldn't I? I was the good kid. I was the one who always gave in. But I didn't give in. "I'll tell you what," I started, letting the words linger in the air. "You and Ezra can stay, but I've got some conditions. I'm not just going to let you walk in here like nothing happened." Melanie blinked, clearly surprised by the shift in my tone. She opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. "No, you're going to listen. Because I've spent years being the one who gets the short end of the stick. I've been the one in the garage while Ezra got everything. I've been the one who's been ignored and I'm not doing it anymore." Ezra stood up from the corner, confusion and a bit of annoyance crossing his face. "What's your problem? Mom's just asking for a little help and you're acting like we've done something wrong." "You've done everything wrong, Ezra," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "You just don't see it. You've never seen it. But maybe now you will." I could feel the tension in the room thickening. Melanie, now realizing I wasn't backing down, stepped forward. "Hudson, this isn't the time for this. We need to focus on the repairs, not—" "No, we need to focus on this," I interrupted, gesturing to the house, to the mess, to all the years of anger and resentment that had built up. "You and Ezra need to understand that I'm not just going to be the good kid anymore. I'm not your doormat." I took a deep breath, letting the silence settle. "You want to stay here? You're staying in the garage. That's your space now." Melanie looked stunned. Ezra's face was a mixture of confusion and resentment, but I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something for myself. I wasn't asking for forgiveness or trying to be the bigger person. I was taking control. I'll help you with the repairs, I added, but this is the last time I'm putting myself last for the sake of anyone else. There was a long pause. Finally, Melanie sighed. Fine, she said, her voice resigned but not entirely angry. We'll make it work. As they settled into the garage, the irony wasn't lost on me. They were finally in my space. The space I had fought so hard to accept. The space I had made my own. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I had won. Raised my alcoholic ex-husband's son after his mom abandoned him. I helped him through school, jobs, and even paid for his wedding. But he introduced her as his only mother. I've been married to my husband, Jasper, for 18 years now. When Jasper and I first met, he was a single father, doing his best to raise his son, Kyle, all on his own. It was clear to me from the start how much he loved his son, and as I got to know them both better, I began to understand the challenges they had faced together. Jasper had been through a lot before we met, particularly in his previous relationship with Kyle's biological mother, Cece. From everything Jasper has shared with me, it's evident that their relationship was far from healthy. Cece struggled with alcoholism, which not only caused tension in their marriage but also created a toxic environment for everyone in the household, especially Kyle. The more Jasper opened up to me, the more I realized how difficult it had been for him. He told me how their relationship was filled with constant fighting, much of it stemming from her drinking. Cece would drink throughout the day, even when Kyle was at home and needed her attention. Instead of being the nurturing mother Kyle needed, she would neglect him, often failing to provide him with even the basic care, like proper meals, baths, or check on his homework. As a result, Kyle's physical and mental health began to deteriorate, which only added to Jasper's worries. Several times Jasper had come back home to find his son crying in a corner, still hungry, and his clothes looking dirty. Jasper, being the caring father he is, tried everything he could to help Cece turn things around. He urged her to seek help and be a better mother for Kyle's sake, but his pleas often fell on deaf ears. The more he tried to help, the more resistant Cece became. She would lash out at him, and their arguments would escalate to the point where Cece would scream at the top of her lungs, throw things around the house, and even make terrifying threats. One of the most disturbing things Jasper told me was that Cece would threaten to take her own life if he ever left her. It was clearly a manipulative tactic that left him feeling trapped, trying to keep the peace while also protecting Kyle from the chaos. As a result, Jasper was constantly walking on eggshells, trying to manage Cece's unpredictable behavior while also trying to be a loving and supportive father to Kyle. Eventually, things reached a breaking point when Cece crossed a line that would change everything. One day Jasper's mother had come to visit them. She was a strong, no-nonsense woman and she could see very well how much Cece neglected doing household duties and taking care of Kyle. At some point during her stay, Cece decided to steal some of Jasper's mother's jewelry. It was a desperate and reckless act, fueled by her ongoing struggles with alcoholism and perhaps her need for money to buy more alcohol. Fortunately, she was caught red-handed by Jasper's mother, who confronted her. Cece tried to brush it off, blaming her alcoholism for her actions, as if stealing from someone was such a normal thing to do. However, Jasper's mother was livid, but more than that, she was deeply concerned about the impact Cece's behavior was having on her son and grandson. That night, she sat down with both Jasper and Cece for a serious conversation. She told Cece in no uncertain terms that she needed to seek help immediately. The chaos she was bringing into the household was no longer something that could be excused. Jasper's mother firmly let them know that if Cece didn't get the help she needed, she would have no choice but to call Child Protective Services on them. The well-being of her grandson was at stake, and she wasn't about to stand by and let things continue as they were. As expected, Cece grew defensive. She reacted as she always did when she felt cornered, making the same threats she had often used against Jasper during their arguments. She threatened to unalive herself and kept saying how everyone should be more patient with her since she was doing her best to quit alcohol. But Jasper's mother didn't back down. She wasn't intimidated by Cece's outbursts or her threats. Instead, she calmly but firmly told Cece that if she continued to make threats of self-harm, they would call 911. If necessary, they would have her placed on a 72-hour psychiatric hold, where she would be forced to confront her issues under professional supervision. Cece was taken aback. For the first time, she realized that her usual tactics weren't going to work. She was up against someone who wouldn't be bullied or manipulated. Faced with the reality that her behavior was no longer going to be tolerated, Cece fell silent. Later that night, I guess Cece must have realized that she had no other choice left, or perhaps she just wanted to escape the mounting pressure. Whatever the reason, Cece decided she had had enough. Without any further confrontation, she quietly packed a few of her belongings. Before leaving, she scribbled a brief note, saying that she was done with both Jasper and his son. Jasper tried a lot to contact her and urged her to go with him for marriage counseling so that they could try to save their marriage for the sake of their son, but Cece was done. She didn't fight for custody of Kyle during the divorce proceedings. In fact, the only thing she cared about was securing a hefty alimony payment. She signed away her parental rights without a second thought, effectively severing her ties to her son. Kyle, who had already been through so much, never even got the chance to say goodbye to his mother. One day she was there, and the next, she was gone, vanished from their lives without a trace. From that point on, Jasper was left to pick up the pieces and move forward with his son, determined to give Kyle the stable and loving home he deserved. As for Cece, she didn't bother staying in contact and just became nothing more than a painful memory for the both of them. By the time I met Jasper, he had already been through so much, and yet, he had managed to remain a dedicated father to Kyle. I admired his strength and resilience and felt really comfortable around him. Initially, it wasn't easy to date Jasper, particularly because of his son. Kyle was fiercely protective of his father, and it was obvious that he wasn't comfortable with the idea of sharing Jasper's attention with anyone else. Given everything he had been through with his mother, it made perfect sense. He had already lost one parent to abandonment, and I could see how deeply that fear of being left behind still lingered within him. Earning Kyle's trust became my priority, and I knew it was going to take time, patience, and a lot of love. From the beginning, I made a conscious effort to show Kyle that I wasn't going anywhere. I understood how fragile his sense of security was, and I wanted him to know that I was committed to both him and his father. Every day, I found small ways to connect with him, to show him that I cared about him just as much as I cared about Jasper. Whether it was spending time doing the things he enjoyed, helping him with his homework, cooking his favorite meals, listening to his concerns, or simply being there when he needed someone to talk to, I worked hard to build a bond with him. It was a slow process, and there were moments when it felt like I wasn't making any progress. But I kept reminding myself that Kyle's trust had been shattered before, and it was going to take time to rebuild it. Over the course of the 3 years that Jasper and I dated, I slowly began to see changes in Kyle. Little by little, the boy started to open up to me. The walls he had built around himself began to come down, and he started to accept me as a part of his life. It wasn't just about tolerating my presence, it was about genuinely welcoming me into the family. The turning point came when Kyle gave his blessing to Jasper's plans to propose. Knowing that Kyle supported our relationship meant everything to me. Our wedding day was one of the happiest days of my life, not just because I was marrying the man I loved, but because of the speech Kyle gave. Standing up in front of our family and friends, Kyle spoke from the heart about how grateful he was to have me in his life and how happy it made him to see his father so content. Hearing those words brought tears to my eyes because it was a testament to the journey we had all been on together. Over the years, Jasper and I have worked hard on our marriage. Our relationship is a reminder that family isn't just about blood, it's about the bonds we choose to create, the love we choose to share, and the commitment we make to one another. We've done our best to provide Kyle with the stable, loving home he deserves, and through it all, Jasper has remained the devoted father and husband I fell in love with. Raising Kyle has not been easy. While there have been many moments of joy and connection, there were also rough patches, especially during his teenage and early adult years. Those years Kyle went through a phase of intense mood swings, rebellion, and anger. It was as if all the unresolved pain and confusion from his early childhood came to the surface, and Jasper and I had to deal with it. There were multiple times when Kyle would lash out at his father, blaming him for his mother walking out of their lives, even though Jasper had done everything in his power to stop that from happening. Kyle's anger often spilled over onto me as well. He would accuse me of turning his father against him, of somehow poisoning their relationship. I had never done that, and hearing those words really stung. Things escalated when Kyle started engaging in risky behaviors at school. He would sneak out in the middle of the night, stealing our car to go on joyrides with his friends when he only had a learner's license. This was extremely dangerous. Jasper and I would wake up to find the car missing, and we would call Kyle urging him to come back home immediately. He would then come back home, often smelling of alcohol. Then there were the times he got caught smoking weed at school, which eventually led to his expulsion after the second warning. But despite all these difficulties, I never gave up on Kyle. When he was expelled, I made it my mission to find him another school, one that would offer him a fresh start. I spent countless hours researching, making phone calls, and visiting schools to ensure he had the best possible environment to turn things around. It wasn't easy, but I knew Kyle deserved the opportunity to get back on track. I did my best to always be there for him in every way I could. I attended all of his parent-teacher meetings and encouraged him to get involved in after-school activities, hoping that if he found something he was passionate about, it might help him channel his energy in a positive direction. Every year without fail, I organized birthday parties for him, exactly the way he wanted, making sure he had moments of joy and normalcy with his friends, even when things were tough at home. Kyle didn't make it easy for me, though. He would talk back to me, yell at me in frustration, or try to push me away with his anger. But no matter how hurtful his words were, I always forgave him like he was my own child because, in my heart, he was. I knew that beneath all that anger was a boy who was struggling, who just needed someone to believe in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. There were also a few times when Kyle was caught trying to steal from me. Instead of punishing him harshly, I would sit down and talk to him, trying to understand what was really troubling him. I wanted him to know that he could trust me, that I was there to help him, not to judge or abandon him. We even sent him to therapy, hoping that a professional could help him work through the deep-seated issues that were driving his behavior. Through it all, I held on to the belief that Kyle had a golden heart, that his rebellious phase was just that a phase. I knew that with enough love, patience, and guidance, he would eventually grow out of it and find his way. I never gave up on Kyle because I loved him, and I knew that he was worth fighting for. As the years passed, Kyle began to slowly change. The intense anger and rebelliousness that had characterized his teenage years gradually gave way to a more mature and patient demeanor. The fights with us became less frequent, and I noticed that he was starting to develop a greater sense of understanding and empathy toward those around him. It was as if he was finally becoming calmer, allowing him to see things more clearly. One day, Kyle opened up to us about his true feelings about his mother, Cece. Despite everything that had happened all those years ago, Kyle missed her and felt a deep need to understand who she was and why she had left him. He told Jasper and me that he wanted to find her and get to know her. It was a difficult conversation because while I could see how important this was to Kyle, Jasper had strong reservations about the idea. My husband remembered all too well the pain and chaos Cece had brought into their lives. He knew how easily she had abandoned Kyle without a second thought, and he feared that reconnecting with her could reopen old wounds or cause new ones. He wanted to protect Kyle from the potential disappointment and hurt that could come from trying to build a relationship with someone who had never really cared about them. However, I could see where Kyle was coming from. No matter how much he loved his father and appreciated the life we had built together, there was a part of him that needed to face the past, to seek out the answers that only his mother could provide, otherwise he was always going to have unresolved issues. So, I encouraged Jasper to let Kyle make his own decision. I explained that while it was natural for him to want to shield Kyle from more pain, Kyle was old enough to make this choice and strong enough to handle the truth, whatever it might be. Reluctantly, Jasper agreed. He still had his doubts, but he trusted that Kyle needed to go through this process in order to move forward. So, in the end, Kyle set out to track down his mother. It wasn't an easy task since Cece had essentially vanished from their lives, and her relatives were hesitant to share any information. Eventually, though, Kyle's maternal grandmother took pity on him. She gave him Cece's address and phone number and encouraged him to meet her. When Kyle finally met with Cece, it was a moment that was both clarifying and painful. She wasn't the warm, loving mother he had pictured her to be. She was still an alcoholic and had gone on to marry another man and have more children with him. She was quite upfront with Kyle about the fact that she had been the one responsible for the breakdown of their family. She acknowledged her faults and the choices she had made that led to her leaving Kyle and Jasper behind. When Kyle asked her why she had never checked in on him, Cece told him frankly that he was just a reminder of her painful past and that she wanted to move on. Despite how much her answer hurt Kyle, he urged his mother to stay in touch with him. While leaving, that woman even had the audacity to ask Kyle for money to pay for her cab fare, and Kyle foolishly gave in. I guess this must have shown Cece how gullible Kyle was and how she could now use him to get more money. Over the years, Kyle has continued to maintain a relationship with his mother, Cece, despite the complications and concerns that have come with it. It wasn't what Jasper or I had hoped for, especially given how Cece had treated them in the past, but Kyle's loyalty to his mother has remained strong. The only time Cece would ever agree to meet with Kyle was when she needed something, usually more money. There were even times when she would drop her other children, the ones she had after leaving Jasper, on Kyle, expecting him to babysit them for free while she would go off to do her own thing. We could see how Cece was taking advantage of him, and it hurt to watch Kyle, who had such a good heart, be manipulated in this way. However, whenever we tried to talk to Kyle about it, to make him see that his mother was using him, he would get angry. He would tell us that we had no right to interfere in his relationship with her, that it was his decision to make. Kyle was usually so calm and pleasant with us, but when it came to his mother, he was always quick to draw a line and ask us to back off. It was clear to us that this was a sensitive issue for him, and though it was difficult, we had to learn to let it go. As much as we wanted to protect Kyle, we realized that pushing too hard would only drive a wedge between us. Kyle needed to come to his own conclusions about his mother. So, with heavy hearts, Jasper and I begrudgingly stepped back and let Kyle have his relationship with Cease. In the meantime, I focused on being there for him in other ways, providing the love and support he needed. Whenever Kyle needed help asking out a girl, he would come to me for advice. When he moved to a new apartment, I helped him pack everything and even set up his new place. Every week, I made it a point to visit him and bring along groceries and home-cooked meals. Kyle hated cooking, and I knew that without a little help, he'd probably end up living on takeout or whatever was quick and easy. So, I filled his fridge with the meals I knew he loved, making sure he had something nutritious and tasty to come home to after a long day. It was my way of taking care of him, even from a distance, and I could tell that he appreciated it, even if he didn't always say so out loud. When it came to girl troubles or any other issues he was dealing with, Kyle knew he could always talk to me. He would sit down and open up about whatever was on his mind, and I would listen without judgment. I was proud of the trust we had built, and I cherished the fact that he felt comfortable coming to me with his problems. Even though Jasper was his father, and they had a strong bond, Kyle often chose to come to me first because he knew I'd approach things with a calm and understanding heart. A year ago, Kyle met Serena, and from the moment she entered our lives, I knew she was someone special. Serena is a kind-hearted person with a warmth that immediately made her a part of our family. I had always hoped Kyle would find someone who could bring him happiness and stability, and Serena was everything I could have wished for. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and this year, Kyle proposed to Serena. When she said yes, it felt like a new chapter was beginning for all of us. Since then, Serena and I have been deeply involved in planning their wedding to perfection. We both love spending time with each other, and I've cherished every moment of working with Serena to make their special day special. Serena knew about the complexities of our family history, including the ongoing issue with Cece. She had seen the way Cece would shamelessly keep asking Kyle for money every month and the financial strain this would then cause him. After they got engaged, Serena was firm in her stance that if she and Kyle were to build a future together, they needed to put an end to the financial support Kyle had been providing to his biological mother. Serena told him that he could continue to have a relationship with Cece even without sending her money. This stance was not well received by Kyle, who was always very sensitive when it came to his mother. When Serena first brought up the issue, it led to an argument between them. Kyle felt torn between his love for Serena and his sense of responsibility toward his mother. However, Serena stood her ground, making it clear that their future together was at stake and that they needed to prioritize their own needs. Eventually, Kyle came to understand Serena's perspective. For the first time in years, he stopped sending money to Cece each time she reached out. Serena also took it upon herself to speak directly with Cece. During their conversation, she firmly told Cece that Kyle was now going to get married to her and that it was time for her to stop asking for financial help from him when she already had another family. As you can guess, Cece's reaction to this new boundary was predictable. She was furious and felt betrayed. In her anger, she tried to manipulate Kyle, encouraging him to break up with Serena. She clearly saw he would no longer continue to be her cash cow if he ever married Serena. But Kyle didn't heed her advice. 2 months ago, Kyle and Serena finally tied the knot. I had looked forward to this day with excitement and pride, knowing how much Kyle and Serena meant to each other. Throughout the wedding, Kyle ignored me like I didn't exist. At first, I thought it was all in my head, but as the day progressed his behavior became more apparent. During the reception, when Kyle had to give a speech, he spoke about his father for raising him to be a good son and then thanked his biological mother, Cece, for being his only mother and for always being there for him. Not once did he even bother mentioning my name or how I had helped raise him all these years. More than Cece, I had been his mother all these years and had even contributed to his wedding expenses, yet I was completely snubbed. I was stunned and deeply hurt when he didn't even glance my way. As the evening progressed, Kyle went around introducing Cece as his mother to Serena's relatives and talked about how happy he was to have her with him. I understood that Cece was his biological mother, but it made me feel like he didn't really value me and my sacrifices for him were all reduced to nothing. Both Jasper and Serena shared my feelings of hurt and confusion. They had no idea that Kyle would snub me like this at his own wedding. Cece, on the other hand, seemed to relish the attention. She acted like the star of the evening, and not even once did she come to thank Jasper and me for raising Kyle for all these years. Since the wedding, I've been grappling with feelings of sadness and rejection. It's been painful to realize that despite all that I have done for Kyle, he seems to disregard my role in his life. When Kyle first reached out after the wedding, I had hoped for an apology, or at least some acknowledgement of how hurt I felt. Instead, he called to explain that Serena had talked to him about my feelings and he felt that I shouldn't be so jealous of his biological mother, Cece. I was taken aback by this interpretation. I wasn't jealous, I was hurt and disappointed by the way I had been disregarded after everything I had done for him. Kyle's next words cut deeply. He said that, at the end of the day, Cece would always be his mother and that no matter what I had done for him, I would only ever be a stepmother. Hearing this felt like a blow to the heart. It was as though all the love, care, and sacrifices I had made were being minimized and dismissed. It was an incredibly painful moment, realizing that despite all my efforts, my role in his life was being relegated to a secondary position. Hence, after this conversation, I decided to take a step back from the relationship to process my feelings. I needed time to come to terms with this fact. Jasper was understanding and even wanted to have a conversation with his son regarding this, but I told him that Kyle was now an adult, and if he couldn't truly value me after all these years, it was pointless to keep fighting for something that seemed one-sided. I felt deeply betrayed. I had been through hell raising Kyle since he was a little boy, helping him through his struggles, and supporting him in countless ways. It hurt that this was how my efforts were being acknowledged by being overlooked and dismissed. It's been several weeks since Kyle and I last talked. However, yesterday he called me multiple times. I chose to ignore his calls because I still needed time away from him. But when he called for the 5th time, I decided to answer. It turns out he was in a panic because Cece, who had come to stay with him and Serena for a few days, had disappeared that morning. Along with her disappearance, 2 of his expensive watches and some emergency money he kept at home were also missing. He asked if I could drive with Serena and him to confront Cece, as he knew how difficult she could be and he didn't want to involve the police and get her arrested. I scoffed and realized the real reason he wasn't asking Jasper for help was that he knew his dad would yell at him for his continued relationship with Cece even after she had shown him time and time again that she didn't actually care about him. He knew I was kind and might help him, but after the way he had snubbed me, I was done babying him. I pointed out to him that I wasn't his biological mother, hence he needed to man up and confront his mother all on his own if he wanted his things back. He got angry and told me I needed to get over the wedding and help him because he really needed me. I told him that he deserved this from his biological mother and ended the call. Ida for not helping out my stepson after what he did to me? Update 1, thank you, everyone, for letting me know that I'm not at fault here. Kyle and Serena did confront Cece about the stolen money and jewelry. She admitted to stealing them but refused to return anything. When Serena threatened to call the police, Cece yelled at them for being selfish and revealed that her children needed the money. She went on to say that both Kyle and Serena needed to learn to share with her children since they were also related to Kyle, hence part of his family. Cece showed absolutely no remorse. I guess this must have finally opened Kyle's eyes to the reality of the situation. He must have realized that having Cece in his life meant supporting her and her children. He told her firmly that she was no longer allowed in their house and that he would call the cops if she ever showed up again. Cece argued that she was his mother, but Kyle yelled back that she had done nothing for him and that he was done with her. Later, Kyle called to apologize and explained everything. He has promised to come tomorrow to talk about why he ignored me at the wedding. Even though I'm still hurt and upset, I've decided to hear him out. Update 2, Kyle came over to our place and we had a talk. So it turns out that before his wedding, Cece had a talk with Kyle and insisted that he introduce her as his mother at the ceremony. She argued that it would be embarrassing if people found out she had abandoned him and that I had helped raise him, so she wanted Kyle to lie and say she'd always been part of his life, even though it wasn't true. Cece knew only me, Serena, and Jasper's family were aware of the truth, however she also knew that we wouldn't embarrass Kyle by revealing it. She had demanded that Kyle agree to her wishes or she wouldn't attend the wedding. Kyle, feeling emotionally blackmailed, foolishly agreed to her demands. He admitted to us that he took full responsibility for what happened and acknowledged that he gaslighted me when I was later hurt by his decision. He said he understood if I wanted to distance myself from him, given that he was the one who ruined things. I told him that while I appreciated his honesty, I was still unsure whether to fully believe him. I've asked for some time to clear my head, and he has agreed for the time being. Update 3, since my last update 3 months ago, I've decided to forgive Kyle and move on from the incident. I've taken everyone's advice and no longer go out of my way to baby him. However, if he does need help, I assist him in whatever small way I can. Cece hasn't contacted him anymore and he and Serena are doing just fine. In other news, Jasper and I have a vacation planned for next week, and we're excited to spend some quality time together.